Don't go breaking my heart. All right. Cat and Cloud Podcast.
Chairman
Monday
Meow.
morning.
Ready,
Chris,
and
Jared,
go.
and Charles.
Ready,
We're
and
here?
go.
We're on it.
Pop it. Pop it. Pop.
Hop.
Pop.
Hop it.
Chuck's been diving deep into the, what do you call it?
Yeah.
Ethos.
Yeah, what into the podcast
Specialty
sphere.
coffee acquisition and growth podcast circuit.
Yeah, well, it started because I've been listening. I found this podcast called Acquired, which is a podcast. I think they've been doing it for like almost, I don't know, 10 years now or something. But it's two VC guys in the Bay Area that do almost like business histories. And they go through like the histories of businesses, but they also do like the histories of like acquisitions and companies going public, and they go through kind of like the economics of the business and stuff, which as like a I don't know, a guy that like I appreciate like the I don't know numbers, how businesses work, right? It's like I find that interesting. So I listened to a few of them, and there's a ton of different episodes, but just this weekend I found that there were 3 coffee related episodes. So I kind of deep dived into those this weekend. And so the first one is, so that they have one specifically related to the Starbucks IPO in maybe 1994. It was 92 or 94. I think maybe 92. And then they have one related to the Nestle purchase of Blue Bottle, which was really interesting. And they also go through kind of like a history of Blue Bottle as they do the episode. And these episodes, I mean, they can range from like an hour to like 2.5 hours.
I'm
so
seeing some 3-hour episodes here.
Yeah, so it goes pretty in depth. And then the last one was one that they did just in June of this year, which was like a 2-hour sit down with Howard Schultz. And going through kind of like the history of Starbucks, with him, which, particularly I find like the early years of that interesting, but there's also, I think, some interesting nuggets from, as he talks about the later parts as well, because he's been CEO 3 different times.
Right.
And so there's these periods when he was in charge and when he wasn't.
He's kind of, I picture him as the Steve Jobs of the coffee industry,
Yeah,
where it's
totally.
Steve Jobs is at the helm of Apple, then essentially gets fired,
Yeah. Outrageous.
and then everyone's like, "Oh, we kind of need you to come
Turns
back."
out- yeah, and you find that listening to the Howard Schultz one, that whenever there was trouble, he
I'll
gets
solve
brought
it.
back in, but also kind of like and this is all kind of just like my perspective, but it's kind of like, he owns up to the fact that like he never did a really good job internally developing a successor. And so one of the reasons he felt like he had to keep coming back in, and I think this is relevant. This is actually one of the points that I pulled out to kind of, as we're going to talk about this stuff, is that like I feel like we do it's hard, but we do a really good job, and maybe we'll step it back, right? Like I have a lot of respect for how Howard Schultz really does, when you listen to him talk, really believes in the culture of the company. From when he started, really believes in the people of the company, like puts the guest experience, ahead of most everything else, especially when it was small. Like you can get a sense in the podcast that as it's grown, it's almost gotten so big that it's gotten away from him. But that like back when it was smaller, you could really.
Is he the CEO currently? He's
No,
not, right?
He is
No.
not really. He is not part of the board. He's not the CEO. He's not.
He doesn't even go
employed
here.
or anything by the company anymore. Because they just recently hired the former CEO of Chipotle.
You have Chipotle.
Really?
So I don't know, for better or
Interesting.
worse, but like that was, maybe just like the background of it, right? As like, I don't know if you want to hop into that at all. It's like, but it just really became apparent, like when they were small, right, that they have a lot of ideals around the third place.
Yeah.
And it's like you create a team and you I don't know, you like nurture your team, you appreciate your team members, and then they provide a great experience for your guests, and then your guests make your investors happy.
Did they
make the business work?
Did
Essentially,
they give insight? We're using small and Starbucks in the same line. So like small for them, was he speaking about, what small was when you're kind of,
totally.
how many stores, how many?
Yeah. So, and I'm sure people know kind of like the history of like the whole Pete's and Starbucks.
I don't think so.
I mean, not in the
Probably
world.
not.
No. We do.
Deep dive version of that. So, Starbucks was originally founded by Jerry Baldwin is the main name that I know, but there were two other guys. It was actually really cool. I got to meet Jerry Baldwin when I worked for TechnoServe because he's one on the board of directors of TechnoServe. But it was originally Jerry Baldwin, Zev, and another guy that started Starbucks in Seattle. But they'd gone to school in San Francisco, and so they were actually really big, like disciples. Like Alfred Pete was their mentor. And so they were really into what he was doing. And so, but when they were in Seattle after school, they opened a number of stores, right, where they only sold roasted beans, right? This is like the 70s.
Yeah.
And
the original beatniks, dude.
yeah. And so, Howard Schultz came and he essentially loved he came from New York. They loved what they were doing. He was kind of doing like the corporate rat race. And wanted to, came out to Starbucks, was like, this is amazing. And he essentially got hired as like their head of marketing when they had maybe like 3 stores. And then Alfred Pete was retiring and he was selling Pete's. And so Jerry Baldwin and the other guys who had originally started Starbucks, they bought Pete's from Alfred Pete. But I don't even think Pete's didn't have any stores at this point.
Okay.
I think they only
just wholesale roasting.
Just wholesale roasting. And this is actually like one of the funny things he brings up is that the original Starbucks stores were Pete's coffees.
Well, I do know that.
Pete's coffee, right?
Yeah.
They weren't roasting.
Starbucks was a whole account of Pete's.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like in the 3 stores they had to start out with. And then, but the issue was that through buying Pete's, the combined entity of Starbucks and Pete's got into financial trouble. And so then that was like the impetus for Jerry Baldwin and the Starbucks guys to essentially they wanted
split up. They left to go to Pete's.
Yeah, they wanted to run Pete's and move to the Bay Area, and so they were going to sell Starbucks. Which again, at the time that they sold it, I want to say was, I wrote down, I want to say it was 5 stores, because when Howard Schultz bought them together, there was like 9. Yeah, I think there were 5 or 6 Starbucks stores, and they sold it for $3.8 million, which was about one-time sales. They were doing about $3.8 million.
Okay.
They were very busy for that time of life.
Yeah, just doing. They did what sold
inflation.
beans, and they did a mail order,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which, the logistics of which couldn't have been amazing. I don't know. Maybe shipping was a lot cheaper back then, but
I think shipping was definitely cheaper back then.
Shipping small amounts of coffee out to people.
The harder part seems to be, how do you get in front of people? It's not like people are going online in the early 90s to shop for coffee. It's all catalog sales or people gifting to other people. That's really interesting in and of itself.
Right, yeah, because this is like late 80s.
Because I remember with skateboarding, just shortly after that, early 90s, like the catalogs were everything. You'd get CCS, which was California Cheapskates, and you'd wait for the monthly catalog to come out, and you'd be sitting around the lunch table circling what you wanted and saving your money, and then sending a check in the mail.
Yeah, and
my hockey
via
gear,
order
dude.
form.
And he talked about like I guess with the first store, right, is in
or like East Bay with sports.
East Bay too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Sorry, East Bay. Yeah, that was the one I remember.
Yeah, I remember that. I get my
catalog?
baseball bats out of there.
Yeah,
Exactly,
so are people looking through some sort of?
Yeah.
Are they sending out thousands of Starbucks catalogs, like doing a mail blast in the same way that a company now would do an email blast or a social media push?
I wonder if they were, but also, right, their first store was located in Pikes
Pike's Place.
Pike's-
Yeah.
Pike's Place Market. So they got a ton of tourists,
Right. That's just
who
that
would
could be-
come, and then the tourists would sign up for like mail order.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So that was kind of like one of their main marketing things.
Yeah. Fun fact, the store that they say is the original store is not the original store. It's down the street, still in Pike's Place. But if you look at pictures from the early store, the OG store is on the corner, and it's maybe a block and a half away from what they claim to be the original store now.
Yeah.
Which the store that you can go in now is a small shotgun. It's not that cool, even though they do a good job with it, because
rectangle,
they kind of
small
treat
one.
it like a Disneyland, so to speak. But the original one is cool because it's on the corner. It's got these cool windows up top. Anyway,
Yeah.
sidebar.
Yeah, and Howard Marks's vision was like he worked for he worked for Xerox, which was like the
Copy
the
machine company.
technology, it was like
Yeah.
the Google of the 70s, right, back in the day. And then he worked for some kind of Scandinavian like housewares company, and like that was what took him to Italy, right? He'll always talk about like this first trip to Italy
Right.
where he experienced like the
He's all bringing
espresso
it back.
bar, and that was what he got excited about and wanted to bring it back to the US. And it's like the kind of like the Steve Baldwin and the original Starbucks crew, they didn't have any interest in creating what they saw as like restaurants, essentially, as like selling drinks.
Right. So that's why he set up that other company.
Yeah,
they
he
talk
set
about
up
that?
Il
Il Giornale?
Giornale,
Yeah.
was a company that he left Starbucks, set that up, and then he had raised some money. He raised maybe like $1.5 million for that company. He opened 4 stores, and then when Starbucks, Jerry kind of approached him and was like, "Hey, I think you're the right person to buy this," and so he essentially had to like raise all the money to purchase it, which he was able to do. And then when they combined, and whenever the deal went through, it was at like 89 or late 80s, early 90s, he had 4 Il Giornale stores, 5 Starbucks stores, and I think 2 stores in process. So it was like
Yep.
essentially
9 and change.
9, getting
Coming.
to 11.
And then
Okay.
they rolled all the Il Giornales, became Starbucks.
Yeah.
I talked to Kent Baki about this
Yeah.
at the coffee museum right around the corner from La Marzocco at about that time, because he was just there. Like they were selling.
They live there, right?
Well, he lived there, but they were selling espresso machines to. I think they sold the espresso machines to Il Giornale.
Oh, so they were already in business with them. Okay.
And then the story that he told me, which I have on film, it's really cool, is that because Kent had also went to Italy, which is where he met everybody at La Marzocco, which was essentially a boutique espresso machine manufacturer, super small. And they got set up with distribution in the U.S. and were selling to Starbucks early in their growth
Remember
phase. So
that.
they had a handful of stores. And then at some point, I don't know if they talked about this, but it went from those, 9 or 11 stores, and they were opening, like 50 or something stores
Yeah.
a year. So I don't know the time frame in between that.
Yeah, it kind of happened almost immediately to where, and it was really interesting because I think of like how this early period of Starbucks was like the most interesting for me to listen to, because I think it has like the most parallels to like the specialty coffee industry in certain ways. And it's like, it's like he wanted, he'd be the equivalent of someone who really wanted to like scale their company.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really interesting. What they did is like they essentially created like a development company. And that was almost like what he ran, like alongside. They had another guy that ran the operations of the stores. But it's like they essentially set up a development company. So it's like they weren't like,
So what does the development company do?
the pure business of the development company was to open new stores.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like a whole separate business that
Right, that
was
managed
just
that whole
opening
process.
stores, which makes so much sense to me, because I think of
Mhm.
like, we could for sure, again, tying it back to us, it's like we could for sure be better at how we open stores.
Yeah.
And just like how much it costs, and like how you're working with all these like disparate people, like the contractor, the architect, the real estate agent. And it's like, it totally makes sense that like if you're gonna scale it and where you're opening like as many stores as they did, that they just created a company.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
basically a bunch of project managers.
Where the team members were real estate agents, contractors, people working with the city.
So it wasn't even a project management company. Those people were all in-house.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's how they were able to scale so quickly, because they'd essentially just started a development company.
Right. Because I think what Kent was talking about was they were doing 75-ish. I think it was 50 to 75 a year for some odd years. And it's like, there's no way you're hands-on managing all of those.
No.
You know?
No.
You know, Howard, like when you listen, Howard Schultz said, like he picked all the sites. So that was like pretty much his, I mean, I'm going to say probably one of his only jobs, again, because he had the person doing operations.
So he was a location guy.
But he was like the location guy and worked with their development, or like their development business to scale this like idea as fast as possible. Which was like interesting to hear, because I think of like, again, just how, and again, like how expensive it is working with contractors, city, and real estate agents.
Right. We're talking
just opening
cities.
one store, right? Just opening one store and it just makes so much more sense that if you're going to open a number of stores, that you create some kind of entity that's specifically dedicated to doing that.
So when they started doing that with that big growth push, was this before the IPO or after?
No, I want to say they had 50 stores when they
grew
IPO'd.
Before they got public.
So they grew some of, and they didn't talk about this part, but they must have raised.
Yeah, how are they funding that? Because I'm thinking, okay, if we put all of those people on staff, that's not chump change, especially when you're managing dozens of build outs simultaneously.
Yeah.
You know, if you're opening 60 stores a year, it almost seems like you need a couple teams of those people to manage all of that.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean?
Definitely, right? And so they must have raised some money in between after he bought it and the IPO, which they didn't talk about. Because I know the IPO, it was a relatively small IPO in the scheme of things, to where it was like a $250 million valuation. Like a third of Blue Bottle with when Nestle bought them at?
Yeah, in the early 90s, based on
with
just
like
a handful of stores.
50 stores. They went public, and then that really like jump started the growth after that.
Because they must have, it can't just be the development team is all those people on staff. It's got to be a combination of some of those people on staff and then a lot of project managers. Does that make sense? Because if you're managing, if you're managing build outs, if you're managing that 50 to 75 build outs a year, there's no way, unless it's a gigantic company, one team of contractors.
Okay, so think about, so the one thing that made it easier was that there were no cafes on corners, right? So that was always, again, his big thing. A lot of people big thing is the best real estate at corner spots, right? But like there were no cafes, so it's like, and they would do it market by market. So they were only doing, the first ones were Seattle. I think they had a store in Vancouver, BC, but I don't think that was like a whole market. But it was Seattle, Portland, and LA.
Okay.
Were their three original
hubs.
and they would do a ton of stores in each of those markets before going to the next market.
Right. So they're going
fully saturate one market.
Yeah. So they weren't spread out in terms of trying to manage in the beginning like 50, 75 stores across
the nation.
Sounds like you could have a few pros that know what's up, and then you're going on basically like some form of contracted, you're going to work, you're going to build Seattle, and then we're going to take this same crew and we're going to find our people, and you're going to build Portland, etc.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And then you got the people who run that shit, and it's like, I'm sure there's some sort of incentivization for whoever's on that squad to get bonused out, because you can get fired from that job too.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're just going to be the GC manager or whatever the case may be. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah. And the smaller stores, right? They're probably like around like 1,000 square feet, because they all like
were for
stand-up, right? Stand-up bars in the beginning.
Yeah. Italian style.
Minimal seating.
With minimal seating until they went public, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like, and I like that spot from when they're like 0 to like 11 stores was kind of like the most interesting part because it's like after that you're just getting into like corporate scaling situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is interesting because you were saying that it seems like Howard Schultz. All right, walk me through this one. Right?
Yeah.
Because like you were specifically talking about mobile ordering and how he's kind of bummed on mobile ordering because he's very guest focused.
Yeah.
But I have a hard time putting together someone who is just fully guest and cultural focused with someone who's, I'm going to open 350 stores a year, because that was one of the other Kent Baki conversation things. So when they were doing, that 75 stores a year and they were supplying them with La Marzocco, and then they came back to them one year like, yeah, we're going to do 300 some odd stores, and then they brought that number to La Marzocco in Italy, and they were like, no, we're good. We're not going to do it. We're not interested. We don't have the capacity. We don't care.
Yeah.
And that was how Kent and the group that he put together ended up acquiring La Marzocco.
Yeah.
Was they basically asked if they could build machines in Seattle under license. And
for
Starbucks.
Right?
And then the people who owned La Marzocco, the family, said, you can do that, but you have to buy the company, because they didn't have any heirs to like absorb the company. Like there was no natural heir to take over the company.
Yeah.
Because it was just a smaller shop. So Kent put together an investment group, bought the lion's share of La Marzocco, moved production to Seattle just for Starbucks expansion. And then they kept doing all the other production in Italy.
Yeah.
So that's a fun little tidbit. If you look at a La Marzocco Linea and it has a B on the serial number, it was built in Ballard, Washington for Starbucks.
That is cool.
Cool little tidbit if you see one online or something to buy. So it's like, how is he putting that together? Like, okay, like I'm all about guest experience. Also, we're going to open 300 stores a year.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's like a really interesting, like I love biographies too. Like I read a lot of biographies. And so imagine this over like a 40-year arc.
Right. It's not like
of like how we all, or how anyone changes from when they're like, late 20s, early 30s, over like the next 40 years. And in the beginning, like, because he was super poor, like he grew up super poor in New York, didn't have any money. So it's like in the beginning, he had a lot of energy, visionary, was like, we're going to grow this. It's like my dream to be a public company.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like that was his dream, and it sounded like he felt like he could control the guest experience through that arc,
right?
Of like getting to like 300, or even like their first international market, like the parallel to Blue Bottle is Japan,
right?
And to even just be like an international company. I guess Verve is an international company now at a much smaller scale with their
Japan too.
Japan, right? The love of Japan.
Minotti's
is an
international company, baby.
Yeah, dude.
Minotti's Japan.
International.
Go there.
And I think you can see this arc of
Third
like
location.
Of almost like someone who has this really big idea, and then as you're executing it, like you could hear,
you're like learning along the way, right?
You're just burning out along the way.
That
and like
too.
he retired for the first time from CEO, right? It's like they did all this between 1992 and 1999, and he retired.
It's an 8-year push. That's insane.
Because he was just like, he didn't realize how much it would take from him, and that like, and you can I feel like I could hear the regret of like, and again, like this is why I would never want to scale a company to be a public company. It's like he talked about missing all the like moments with his family and his kids, right? Because he's like going everywhere to all these different cities. He's always traveling. He's signing all these leases, doing all this real estate stuff all over the place. And like he talks about like, dude, it's like woke up and just realized I'd missed all these moments with my kids and my family, and like that sucks.
How old was he when he came on?
That'd be interesting.
Like came on to Starbucks.
Yeah, when he assumed the CEO spot / put together the group to buy the company from Jerry and the gang.
Yeah,
Jer Bear.
Jer Bear. Jerry, I still want to sit down with you if you're listening.
Oh yeah.
Well, Kent knows Jerry. And I was trying to connect with Jerry for when we did those SCA talks.
Yeah.
When we opened, I really wanted his perspective on kind of the stuff we're talking about now. You know, the history of coffee and consumer trends over the years. And
it says he was 29 when he started Starbucks.
Okay.
Yeah, he was born in 53. So 93, he would have been 40.
Oh, so he's
so not as young
already
as
oldish,
but then I mean by 99 he'd be 46. So I mean your kids would have been growing up, right?
I was trying to figure out if his attitude towards I can scale this and keep it culturally sane is just young naivete of a 25-year-old dude who just like, I can do it and I got mad energy.
Yeah, because the other arc, right, that like that is that like going from this idea of like, you know, providing your team members with stock, with like employee ownership, right, and healthcare and all these things that he did in the beginning, to your employees being so disgruntled with the company that they feel like a union, that being part of a union is the best way forward for them, right? There's like a big gap between like a really culturally solid company and one where the people feel like there's such a disproportionate or where they feel like they're not being taken care of, and that a union is going to help them be taken care of better than they believe the company will.
It's weird to think about these decades-long arcs. And okay, what am I saying? If you work at Starbucks, it's a fast food job. It just is. And I don't mean that in any disparaging way. It's like I worked at McDonald's. I worked at McDonald's. That was my first job in the mall in Modesto. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with working a fast food job.
No, it's
but
awesome.
Starbucks is definitely a fast food job. Yeah. And just to talk about it in this setting where we're talking about some dude who went to Italy, had a vision for what the cafe space could be, really inspiring story. We've talked about it before. Those seem like they're worlds apart.
100%.
You know what I mean? Like it's a completely different existence. And I wonder what and I don't know because I don't pay too much attention, but I wonder what the employees feel like they're missing. Is there a tension? Is it just the working experience, or is it a tension between what the company was and what it claims to be versus what they're actually providing? Because I've never heard of, you know, the team members at Jack in the Box unionizing or the team members at McDonald's work like unionizing. And I can't imagine that the work experience is so much more terrible at Starbucks than it is at any other fast food restaurant.
Yeah, it was really interesting if you listen to the interview because like Howard Schultz keeps wanting to like kind of go back to the culture and the hosts, right? It's like they're VCs, they're like straight business numbers, guys, and they're like mobile ordering is amazing, like it captures all these like business efficiencies, and Howard's like no, but it like tears apart the guest experience and it makes it's like it makes it. And here, I guess I'll stop it back up and say I'm not like I'm not pro Howard Schultz or pro Starbucks or anything. I find this like interesting as a I don't know, dissecting like a business and how it's gone from like small to big. But like like the VC guys were like mobile ordering is amazing, and it's like one of them was like, I wouldn't even go to Starbucks if they didn't have mobile ordering. And Howard Schultz was like, it makes me really sad to hear you say that.
Totally.
Like,
that means but they've stepped away from that culture, right?
Yeah.
But he like, well, maybe not him. Well, him. I don't know if he was at the helm when they started to do that.
Yeah.
But when you're making decisions as a business, you're building your promise and you're picking your customer base.
Yeah.
So if you move towards just strict efficiencies, things like mobile ordering, you're saying, I am for this kind of person. When you move to the mass production of drinks and beverages like they do with super auto everything, you're picking a customer base that values those things. Like Starbucks' promise is consistency, convenience, speed. Like that's what their business is about.
like no matter what they say about
no matter what they say about culture, anything else, because it doesn't matter what you say, it only matters what you do. And that's what they do. And they do those things relatively well, you know? So
but that's for a specific customer.
But that's for a specific, you know, it's not for me.
Not for me.
But I do know that if I'm out of town in the middle of nowhere and I need to get coffee and I go to Starbucks, I know exactly what it's going to taste like, and 98% of the time it lives up to that promise, you know. And then I don't know how are they franchises or are they
they have franchises.
There's like this would be like a sidebar, maybe keep it I'll talk about it in a second because I want to talk about one other thing that the going. VC guys love that like that is, again, I'd say part of like Starbucks undoing is like the customization of all the drinks.
Right.
And the VC guys are like, this is amazing. Like your customers could
like so many options.
Get any version of this drink they want. And it's like, and then like they're willing to pay for it. And, you know, you can just see, and I'd argue maybe that like this creates an additional, like the more complex you make it, that creates burdens for your team members.
Exactly.
And it's like that
kind of forces you to move things.
Yeah, I can only imagine how overwhelming that is for team members when they say there's like 1 billion different order combinations that you can get off of a menu at Starbucks.
Yeah, it's probably almost infinite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so it's like the VC guys are like, this is amazing. But it's like they don't understand the impact, right? These like business guys don't understand the impact of like what that does to the culture of a store and like the work of a team member.
So yeah, and then again, that comes back to these same ideas to where if you took, I think it's, again, I'm like you, I don't really have a dog in the fight. I'm not pro or anti Starbucks, and I don't know enough about Howard Schultz to say either way. I will say that anybody who builds a company that's that big in that amount of time, it's just a pretty impressive feat overall.
I mean, he went from 20 to 100 stores in 4 years, over 100 stores in 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, and then
like that's just
10,000.
And then then public, and from 92 to 2000, they went to over 2,500 locations.
Yeah,
I mean that's incredible to create a brand like that, no matter what you think of them and no matter what they do. It's pretty wild.
But you're gonna sacrifice things along the way, which I think is really what I'm harping on here.
Well, so what I'm like saying something similar to you, to where if you take the same thing with the mobile ordering and the efficiencies. You know, you're picking your customer base, you're building your promise. They have this time frame. So like on a brand perspective, they're a globally recognized brand, definitely the biggest in the game, but they've done it in a really compressed time window.
Yeah.
So when you take things like the infinite customization of drinks, that again to me just feels like it's a sales pitch it's a sales pitch to kind of every man, to where it's like, you can have whatever you want whenever you want it, we can build this for you. And there's something about that enables this really quick growth, to where if they would have said, hey, we're more of a traditional Italian cafe, we've got cappuccino and latte and a mocha, and maybe there's a vanilla latte somewhere in the mix, maybe almost like a little bit more accessible version of the third wave model, they probably still could have grown really big, but it would have taken 20 years instead of 5. Because if you're doing that, you're saying no to a bunch of people who you're kind of making a play for the smallest viable market rather than shotgun blast to the world.
Yeah,
and becoming the convenience store of specialty coffee.
Yeah, and part of just what became more apparent as I listened to the whole episode is just how far away they got from a company that has a specific culture. It's kind of, again, it's like a lessons, you can take away like lessons what not to do sometimes from something that's really successful. And I think about like for us, like we have we just intentionally do not do mobile ordering because we understand what that would do to the guest experience, right? It's like we intentionally there will not be 1 billion different combinations of things you can get at our store because we understand the burden that creates on our team members. Another one that he did that I think that we're working on was like the guys asked him if they ever, like the host asked him if he, because he kept talking about culture and the people that work there. And the guys were like, were you ever able to create a metric that capture the culture of your stores to know whether they're healthy or not. And he said he was just like, he's like, no, I was not smart enough to do that or something. But it's just, and again, I think that's a really big failing, because that's something that I feel like we're really intentionally trying to work on, creating some kind of metric or idea, or, you know, in whatever way we can, to measure how culturally dialed in our company is and our stores are, right? It's like, if you're going to have a company where you point your North Star as like, we want to be like one of the best in like workplace culture and hospitality, it's like, we need to have some way to measure how we're doing there. And I think that was is a big failing of Starbucks, in that like, they don't seem interested. They never seemed interested along the way in doing that.
Yeah. I wonder if he's got to be smart enough to do that. Maybe he's not smart enough to figure it out at scale.
Maybe. Well, think about the process. That's so complex. So
it is, but like, we're doing it.
Well, we're doing, yeah, but I'm talking about them though. Like, but the whole thing, like, we wouldn't know necessarily. Without people trying to do the new things, we wouldn't be able to assess them and look at them and experience them and see how it feels. So you could theoretically, like, with all of those different complexities of new happening, and nobody in the world's ever gone through it before in that business space, you could probably think, I don't think this is a great excuse, but you might think something like mobile ordering is only for the people who are like your regulars, and your regulars are going to get better service, which is totally wrong. But you might think that if it's never happened in the world before,
right?
You really might. And you might go out with this like just cause and be like, fuck, I didn't realize all this other stuff would happen.
Unintended consequences.
And I think when you're building something that big and that quick, you have too many new variables. Like, I'm thankful to have seen something like that, because I believe that we can learn.
Well, again, it's a choice to grow that quickly, and to accept the consequences of what happened.
Well, that's another point too, though, because it's like, then it's like, how much are you growing and for what reason? Because then if you get to the level that you're growing and you have to provide for all the external pressures, but then there's a level probably somewhere between that, I know you guys have mentioned that, where you're growing for maybe the right reason, which is provision for people who want to join the leagues, and provision for self. There's probably a pretty big but way lesser number too of places you could build, and find your way to some sort of happy middle ground. Still though, you're going to be going through a bunch of new that you've never seen before, and I think you can battle back and forth to find culture.
I don't know what reason that, but I know about Bakayugo. And then
I think the real answer, which he would never say in public, so let me lay a little groundwork here. It sounds like, I didn't listen to the episode, but this is kind of me getting into his head. It sounds like he's probably proud of what he's been able to accomplish, but also in hindsight sees what could have been and feels a certain way about that.
Sure.
Because the dude's undeniably a dude who can get shit done.
Sure.
Right? So when he says, I'm not smart enough to do that, I don't believe that for a second. I think the honest truth is it was never a priority. Growth was more of a priority than having a strong cultural foundation. And of course, you would never say that as a CEO or someone who grew like a company. Visionary. Yeah, you can't. He's just not going to say that. But that's the truth, even if he doesn't know it or believe it. Because you could accept less and say, you know, instead of 300 stores a year, we're going to do 5.
Yeah.
And over the course of 40 years, still create a really profitable business that has an awesome culture. It's not like, I just don't. I think he could do it.
Back that with wanting to go public too, though, right? If his dream was to become public,
again, which say that just buffers my argument.
No, I agree. But then it comes down to he's looking for influence at that point, and less so like culture.
And there's also unintended consequences that go with becoming a public company.
For sure.
Because one is, then you're going to be judged by the stock market, which wants growth.
Correct.
Right? So it's like, once you sign up to be a public company, you're signing up for growth pretty much above all else.
You're like in the Milton Friedman zone, you know? You're in this shareholder supremacy. And that's the thing too. It's not like nobody knows this, you know? The dude worked at Xerox and where else? Did you say?
It was like a Swedish like homewares company.
So he's not a business noob. You know what you're signing up for when you open up an IPO.
Yeah.
Right. Mm. So again, I'm not hating on the dude, but I have a hard time with him just feeling like, oh, it's just all, it's all decisions.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all choices.
100%. Right. That's what I kind of took away from it. And just like, yeah, what you want as an individual is going to drive you in a certain direction, and that there are unintended consequences to what you choose that you likely didn't think about before you made those decisions,
or that you knew about but you didn't know how they would make you feel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because yeah, for sure, it was like you can it just depends on what someone's idea of success is, right? You can grow slower, you can maintain the cultural integrity of your company, you can develop what we're working on something called Walk the Floor, and it's going to be a score sheet of what would you say, of not only, I don't know,
it'll help us with like cultural integration into our metrics.
Yeah, integrating like the cultural.
It's just capturing all of the touch points, which are visual. Like every time you go into a cafe, your whole experience is based off everything you see, feel, smell, the energy you pick up from the people. Some of the things are easier to capture. Some of the, like, if you're talking drink turnaround times, we want a certain drink turnaround time so people aren't waiting long. That's easy metric to capture. It's harder to capture and quantify what's the energy someone gives you when you walk through the door. Because you see a bunch of different companies do a version of the reach out. So, we have the reach out or the 2-step rule. By the time you're 2 steps into any cafe, someone needs to be saying hello to you. Someone needs to be greeting you. But how you greet someone, not all greetings are created equally.
Yeah.
I used to go to Warehouse Music back in the day, and they would always greet, hey, welcome to Warehouse Music. And it's just super generic, super corny. It didn't feel connected with. So
CVS greeting, I guess.
Right. There's that version of greeting. Welcome to the store versus a cat and cloud greeting, which is you're meeting someone with empathy and you're kind of making some assumptions about them, where they're at. And it's very personable. It's like you're greeting a guest into your home, not like greeting some rando off the street.
Yeah.
So how do you quantify that? And it is possible, but it's trickier.
It is, but I 100% believe it's possible. And for us, and I think for anyone else who's, I don't know, not to say anyone else, but for certain people that have been in the coffee industry for long enough, have been around cafes long enough, you can walk into a cafe and you can know how it feels and like how you would grade the feeling of the cafe and of the service you're getting, of the hospitality you're getting, of the experience you're getting, right? Ultimately, you want to provide and exceed, like you want to provide the best experience we can. And I feel like we can not, I don't know, grade, or we can put a number to how that looks like and what that feels, so that we can, if something happens and it's slipping, it's like we'll know that it's slipping.
Respect.
Right. So so I think tied a bow on that part. And then one of the other pieces that was just a takeaway was that like the idea of companies that are so dependent on their founder that they have to keep going back to him, like how he was CEO 3 times.
No successors.
Yeah, was that he talked about his failing of like never again making the choice or the intention to develop people internally who felt the same way about the company that he did. And so like his lack of doing that led to them continually hiring people from outside the company to lead the company, which then just made it a more generic company over time.
Right.
Understandable.
That totally makes sense. Did Walmart come up at all?
There is a separate Walmart episode. Costco came up because it's also a Seattle-based company, and I guess I don't know. There's some similar things that Costco and them do.
We should listen to the Walmart one. I'm really curious. I haven't done a deep dive, but I've heard some stories. So the stories I've heard, just based on some other podcasts, is that Walmart back in the day was a very different company than it is now. And the reason it is the way it is now is because of that same thing. So Sam Walton did a terrible job of setting up a successor. Like everything was just based off of his vision, and it was all really internal, and he had huge success when he was around.
Yep.
And now that he's not, it's just a completely different
totally
ballgame.
Like efficiency and low prices, commoditized business, like a commoditized business with no feelings to it.
Yeah, and from what I read, low prices were always part of the equation, but it was also a really incredible service culture, really incredible workplace culture. Guest experience is what was high, which is interesting. And you kind of see whispers of that. You know, there's the Walmart greeter, which is like, why the fuck does a big box store have a greeter? And the best I can guess is that that's just a leftover version of this bygone era where guest experience was really important.
Yeah.
And now it's just, you know, generic greeting, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know how much. So we could transition. I could draw some parallels with the Blue Bottle real quick,
or we could do another episode next week,
or we could talk about Blue Bottle next week.
That sounds good to me. This feels like a great 2-parter.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave a cliffhanger for next week.
Yep. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Hey everyone, that's the podcast for the week. Thanks so much for listening. If you heard something that inspired you, let us know, or tell a friend. These are the types of connections that are the most important to us and that we seek to create every day. If there's something you heard and you want to know more about, send us an email to podcast@catandcloud.com or head to our website, catandcloud.com/podcast, and let us know. While you're on our site, check out everything we have to offer. Dive deep into one of our single origin coffees or pick up a little treat for yourself. We have something for everyone, so check it out. Also, find us in the usual places, YouTube, Instagram. We're always there sharing amazing things. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone for being awesome. We'll be back next week.